Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. My name is John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast, episode 1. I am your host, John Kalfa, along with my producer, Stephen Rivera, sitting to my left. And across from me, on the other set of comfy couches here at Wolf Connection, is our CEO and founder, Teo Alfero. Teo, thank you for being on the intro episode to this wonderful venture that we're on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No problem. I know the walk is tough. It's only about 200 feet. So it's like,
it was a trick.
It was a trick. So we want to first start off, for those of us who are listening, who are just getting engaged in this podcast, about what Wolf Connection actually is. It's been 11 years now. I don't know if you can believe that yourself.
Yep.
That this started 11 years ago. So just give us a brief background of how this all began 11 years ago.
Well, Wolf Connection started in 2009 and out of fate, if you might. You know, I wasn't really looking to start a wolf sanctuary, but I was looking for two things. I was on the one side trying to find more powerful way to engage young people, trying to find a way to get them to open up and trust and consider a different way of living. On the other hand, I got to adopt a little wolf dog puppy named Tala that needed help. And looking for a playmate for her, I found a pack of 16 wolves and wolf dogs that needed help. And then when I met them, instead of adopting one, my heart went out. I decided to stay and volunteer and help out. And on a total crazy whim, a couple of months later, I decided to adopt all 16 of them. And that was the beginning of Wolf Connection.
So you say you're a teacher and you're a motivator. You speak and you work with youth for the majority of your life. What were some of the things that you saw were a catalyst with wolves and wolf dogs as opposed to other animals that are used for therapy, horses, dogs, for instance? What were the things that you saw coming with these kids when they interacted with Tala or some of the other early ancestors who are no longer with us here at Wolf Connection?
Well, thank you for asking that. First off, I wish I had a smart answer to that question. The truth is, I did not know that wolf would be so therapeutic and so effective working with people. Initially, I thought I was still looking for a way to engage young people in need. And I was also trying to find a home for these wolves and helping them out. So for me, initially, it was two separate paths. And then I invited, by then I remember I just lectured at Hollywood High School. So I invited the senior class to come to Wolf Connection to meet the wolves. That was it. I mean, just a high. And when I saw them, I saw the young people interacting with the wolves. I began seeing those that were really shy beginning to open up. Those were that didn't want to say anything, sharing their lives. The somber and closed up, laughing, just by meeting the animals. So I began to realize that maybe the two paths that I was looking for began to come together.
I know there's a story you always share, and it's in your book. Teo has written a book. It's on Amazon. It's called The Wolf Connection, if you guys want to look it up. There's a story that you share with one particular student that you had that was a lot of things that you were just speaking about. Shy, a little bit closed off, scared of large canines, and how she opened up when, I believe was it Rocky or was it Tala? I can't remember the ancestor there.
Yeah, that instance happened at the same time of the visit,
right?
Around the same time of this visit from Hollywood High School. So this was a young woman, 15 or 16 years old, that in foster care that had been attacked by a dog when she was a toddler. So she had this fear, this phobia of dogs, and her therapist brought her over to work on that. And then initially, she didn't want to even come close to the enclosures and to the fence, and began to do some introductions through the fence. And then eventually, I proposed to go for a little walk. And then we got Simba and Rocky, and then we went for a little stroll. And initially, she was about 40, 50 feet from me with her therapist. And then, naturally, she began to gravitate towards the animals. And within 20 minutes or so, she was walking next to me, and another 5 or 10 minutes. And, obviously Rocky the way he was, he turned around and greeted her, and that began to brought tears to her eyes. And next thing you know, they are kneeling on the floor, and Rocky's like pawing and licking her and rubbing over her. And so there was a combination of tears and laughter and tears again, and that was the beginning of healing journey for this young woman, to the point that she became a volunteer. She until she graduated high school, she was a regular volunteer at Wolf Connection. She actually helped me name some of the first wolves that we rescued.
What do you see, especially in those early years, that was such a jumping off point for you to make this connection and to really merge these paths that you were on? Because that's, to me, that's such a touching story about how an animal coming from a past that is not so great to an individual who also comes from a past of, some sort of trauma, and then merging together and having such a deep connection just through a walk. How do you feel that works itself out? Or what have you seen just over the course of time?
Was several layers to that question. One is a piece that we teach the kids here at the ranch often is, your purpose, your mission in life, your vision quest doesn't manifest the way you think. Many of us think, well, we do a vision board, and then we do a business plan, and then we figure it all out, and that's the way it's going to work, right? And that was not the case for me. I knew I wanted to be of service. I knew I wanted to help youth more powerfully. And then all this came together in a very, very holistic, integral way. That's one side. On the other side, what we began to discover is this ancestral connection between human and wolves that is extremely, extremely therapeutic and extremely healing. Now I speak about this in the book. Science began to confirm or suggest what traditions around the world have been talking about for millennia, which is the wolf is the first animal we ever associated with. And we have been journeying with wolves, traveling with wolves, hunting with wolves. We have been copying their social structure. The way we take care of our young is an imitation of how the wolves do it. The way we, any native or indigenous tribe is organized pretty much like a wolf pack. Having the leaders and the enforcers and the hunters and the caretakers of the village. So now coevolutionary biologists believe that after so many generations of co-evolving with wolves, we have a memory of this connection in our DNA. So what we propose here at Wolf Connection is that when these young people come in contact in presence of the wolves, this memory gets activated, and then they begin to remember who they are at a primal level, an ancestral level, and that creates a new beginning for them.
And it's something that we speak to this all the time, but something that you just said sparked me for another question, is that there are so many myths and tales and stories surrounding wolves in general, for whatever the reason. As you said, if we've been connecting for tens of thousands of years with this one specific animal, this being, for so long, there's bound to be different iterations of how we view it and how to break those stereotypes. We see it all the time in Hollywood. We see it in the way even fairy tales from a couple hundred years ago, how the wolf is perceived. Can you go into that? I know you spoke about some other fables and fairy tales that were actually switched around, I think just as recent as a couple hundred years ago, right?
Absolutely. Any culture, any tradition where there is or there used to be wolves, which is pretty much the entire northern hemisphere, the wolf is regarded as the teacher. And the teacher of what? The teacher of survival, the teacher of altruism and courage and social values and integrity and heart. And around the time of the witch hunts, around the 11th, 12th century, those stories began to change. We began to, this cloak of darkness began falling on humanity. And anything that until then was sacred to all the pagan traditions and so on began to be demonized. So, and the wolf was one of them. I mean, the wolf became from the teacher and the brother and sister to the bloodthirsty animal that's coming after your kids, right? And then unfortunately, humans, we are creatures of short long-term memory, short long-term
Short long-term,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, within a couple of the studies on this, but within a couple of generations, which is 30 to 50 years, we can completely eradicate social beliefs and tradition and completely go into something new, especially if fear is present. So if the tales of the bloodthirsty killer wolf that is stalking the village and will kill whoever is not paying attention settles, and you push it enough, everybody will just in case go for it.
So what are some of the things that you did early on to sort of break that tradition, or the reasoning for people to believe that? Because again, as we all know, sitting in this room, we work with an animal that is politicized, unfortunately, on both sides of the spectrum. So early on, what were some of the tools that you used to sort of put the ease for these young people to come in and trust an animal that maybe they have a preconceived notion of?
We tackle many fronts in that regard. One is, I spoke at the state hearings to keep the wolves protected in California. That was something that happened a few years back, and I was part of that. On the social and cultural side, with the young people that come to the ranch, what we do is just set up a parallel with their own lives. The young men and women that come to the ranch, they have been ostracized and segregated and pushed aside and labeled. And when they understand how it feels to be labeled themselves, it's a very, very simple, extrapolation to how the wolves are being seen and how quick we are to dismiss an animal that has such value, not only in nature but also in our ancestral culture, and minimize, diminish it to something dangerous and to avoid and destroy.
Yeah, because we've seen those who are listening who haven't seen, there's a video that is popular on YouTube. You can probably find it, where in Yellowstone, after they reintroduced the first breeding pair back into Yellowstone, everything started to shift back to normal. They would probably say, and I know you visited Yellowstone a couple of times, in terms of how wolves are so dynamic to the ecosystem. They need to be there. They are really the ones that keep everything in balance. And that's something that needs to be taught more often than not. Yes, I mean that's something that I think we all need to know, that they're teachers of that way.
Right. So I'm not a biologist. So if I'm not kosher on the explanation, please
right.
Forgive me. Now, the way I understand it is that the top predator, the apex predator in an environment, is the one to can establish a cascade effect in the environment. So they keep the hoofed animals in check. They, in turn, keep the landscape green, and the predation on certain plants is kept in check, and that provides environment for certain birds and insects and lizards and other fungi, and the whole thing is a cascade effect. So the video you're referring to describe that in a way to say, the riverbanks actually got consolidated because it's less
vegetation, I think, around, right?
Vegetation, erosion, and then the creatures that live in the river begin to repopulate. I mean, the whole thing comes back to life. I mean, biologists say the apex predators are the ones to keep the landscape green.
Yeah, and it's that misconception, and it's the thing that I'm sure we've all taken upon ourselves to try and teach these things to any of the adults even that come here that have that preconceived notion of what wolves or wolf dogs may be. So when you've taken a trip, I don't know how many times you've been to Yellowstone. I know it's a handful. What are some of the similarities then that you've seen with our pack here that is very unnatural. All these wolves or wolf dogs come from different situations, different traumas. Some are more wolf than others. So what are some of the similarities that you see even with a pack that is here at the ranch as opposed to out in Yellowstone?
I was, your question reminds me of an instance with my wife watching wolves, through the scopes, and she began to say, "Well, look at that one. She behaves exactly like JC, and that one, that's Kenai." And right, I mean, like the body language and the playfulness and some of them, the stoic behavior, the fluidity, the way they were prancing on each other. I mean, wolves are wolves are wolves. Now, there are big differences in between wolves in the wild and wolves in captivity. Most of it has to do with, first of all, the packs here at the ranch are artificially formed by us. As we rescue the animals, we put them together, and they don't have the freedom to, go to another pack or go to live with someone else. They live where we put them. So that creates most animals in captivity develop different neuroses around space and food and water, resources. So that creates a little bit more competition, a little bit more protectiveness, and over resources. Other than that, and the behavior is very, very similar.
And it's interesting that you say that with the freedom to find your own pack, where a lot of times as humans, it's amazing how similar that dynamic is we're able to go across this globe at any point in time and really find our pack or our individuals that we sort of gravitate towards and make our own way. And it's interesting that you say that, going back to a little bit earlier, that humans and wolves really have that similarity. And we're able to see that almost play out in real time on a daily basis. And even with the kids that come here, you form groups in school, you form friendships in school that way.
You bring up an interesting point. Initially, the early man belonged to one pack, one tribe, one group. And that remained the same for many, many, many years. Eventually, now for our modern times, this is a piece that we teach on our team building programs and corporate programs. We have a multi-pack existence, right? You and I, we are part of this team in a certain capacity. And then you go home, and you are probably the beta or the omega. I don't know.
Probably a beta at this point. Yes.
Right. And then you get together with your high school pals and you have that role. And then you get together at work and you have that role. So we have this multi-pack existence that requires a lot of fluidity and a lot of constant adaptation that we sometimes don't even realize, that we play different roles in the different packs that we belong to.
And how tough, that's such a tough aspect to grab sometimes, because I think there's a lot of people who believe they are just the one, they are the alpha, and that's the only role they can play. And there's
that's called insecurity.
You said it. But don't you feel that sometimes with when we see certain individuals who come here and they feel that they're put in a box, and this is the box that they're meant to play, and it's interesting to see how some of our wolves here have evolved from one role. When they maybe first got here, they were rescued and we pegged them as a beta, and maybe they've moved over to be a nanny now, and how it's okay for that to happen, and that there's freedom to do that.
Sure. And that's called, confidence, right? The ability to, one of the wolf principles that we teach the kids is wolves know how to lead and how to follow, meaning having the fluidity to lead when it's called, lead when you know what you're doing. Also, when it's your subject matter, and when you are in the right place to help, and then be able to follow someone else when it's time to adapt and organize activities. Right. So wolves work in this rotational leadership system, and that there's a lot to be said about humans learning that.
And it's really it's a natural thing that we see, and I bring it back to that because we've seen it even with wolves in captivity, to see those. It's really evolving into yourself and really fully understanding that the way you are as a pup or as a young child isn't necessarily the way that you'll grow up to be. And it's like you said, having that freedom and having those that comfortability around you to be able to evolve into what you actually are at the end of it.
Right. You're talking about self-leadership. So another portion of the program that we teach young men and women here is that you lead from where you are. So we have this, Western, over self-aggrandizing way of living is that everybody wants to be the alpha. And we put a lot of pressure on kids in schools they have to become the leaders and they have to, and I think that's setting them up for failure. I think not everybody has that personality or can lead or can, let's put it this way, fit the mold of what Western society considers an alpha, right? Which is very different than what an alpha really is. And self-leadership, people can lead as an omega, can lead as a tracker, as a hunter, I'm going into different areas of our curriculum for the kids, but bottom line, having the confidence to be yourself.
And we don't only serve youth or have these programs for youth, Teo. There are programs for adults. You've encountered veterans as well who have had these same impacts. And I know in the book, there's this beautiful story about Willow and her impact on a veteran that I'd love if you could share that, because I always love this story.
Sure. We started as a youth program, and yes, you said, over the years, adult groups, formerly incarcerated people, and corporate groups, government groups come to experience the wolves. So the story you're referring to is a program we did with a group of veterans from bomb disposal units, special units. And, if you are in a career in bomb disposal, you typically don't have all your limbs. And this was the case with many of these men and women, especially one man that was, one side of the face was burned and he was missing an arm and a leg. And what he was sharing in general is that the biggest pain for him was not to be mutilated, or the experience during service was the way he was received here. And, he came home a hero, and then kids are afraid of him. People look at him weird because the way he looks, he's, half burnt and he has prosthetics. So we started this program and we went to a facility in Malibu and then unload the wolves, and we form, sit these veterans in a half moon circle to begin with a safety talk. And then the safety talk has to do with, how we approach a wolf, how you safely, interact with them and so on. And we typically have a piece around the wolves are more, amicable to female energy. So they come to the women first, and guys don't take it personal, blah, 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 if that, they don't come to you, right? So in the middle of saying that, Willow's dragging my wife, Renee, across the circle, which she doesn't typically do. She was a very shy animal. Drags her across the circle, goes to this particular man, starts licking his face, and then sat on his lap and is doing this whole wiggle, snuggle, scent rubbing, licking, and nonstop. And this man starts bawling and crying and sobbing and laughing and sobbing again and laughing. And eventually he said that, being picked and loved by Willow was extremely healing for him.
It's such a powerful thing for that to happen, and just for that to be the reaction, because you don't expect those things. And it's just so beautiful for that to happen to an individual that, whether they know it or not, they need that. And that's just the one thing that comes out of that. And I love that story. And it's so beautiful for that to happen.
And that's one of the many gifts the wolves bring. I mean, I mentioned Rocky earlier. Rocky used to have he's passed now, but he used to have this gift to pick in a crowd the person that was the most afraid of dogs.
Right.
Period.
I remember you.
He would plow through a group of people, and the person sitting in a chair in the back, not wanting to interact and holding their breath, he would come to that person and put a paw on their lap and then nuzzle them or lay on their feet. And then we get to find out that they have dog phobias and, terrified of dogs, that kind of stuff. And invariably, each time that person ends up interacting with Rocky and receiving love and in many cases healing their phobias.
Yeah, it's tremendous. It's tremendous. We're gonna stop there, but there's so much more that we're gonna get in with you in later episodes. We're gonna bring you back. We're gonna talk about your book. Just give everybody, please, the title of the book, where they can find it, and give them your social media. I believe you're Teo Alfero on Instagram, and teoalfero.com is your website as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah, then the book is The Wolf Connection, What Wolf Can Teach Us About Being Human, published by Simon & Schuster, and it's on every book outlet.
It's on, yeah. So you guys please go and give it a look and give it a listen, read it, pick it up. And our social media is here at Wolf Connection. We are Wolf Connection on Instagram, Wolf Connection on Facebook and Twitter as well. That's where you guys can really get the grasp of what happens here. You'll get to catch up and see all the stories of all the wolves, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. We're posting videos, photos, learn the stories of our staff and volunteers, and you're going to get more of that too as the podcast rolls on. Teo, thank you so much for being on the first episode. Can't wait to have you back so we can have a deeper conversation on some of the things we touched upon. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. So with that, howls to all of you out there. We will see you all next time.